Hey, welcome to the Explainer. So get this, what if one of the greatest thinkers in history actually gave you the exact tool you needed to prove him wrong? It sounds wild, right? But that's the fascinating story we're diving into today.
Yeah, we're talking about the one and only St. Augustine, one of the most influential minds in, well, all of Western history. And the crazy thing, the ultimate irony, is that a principle he came up with is now being used to correct his own conclusions.
He called it Augustine's razor, and the idea is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. Basically, he said your faith should never, ever be built on scientific nonsense. If the book of nature, science, shows you something is true, you have to adjust how you see things. You can't just stick your head in the sand and deny reality. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is the twist. Today, we're going to see how Augustine's own rule, his own razor, gives us the blueprint for correcting his centuries-old ideas about biology, sex, and relationships. And look, these ideas were based on the best science he had at the time, but that science was, well, deeply flawed. Okay, so first things first, we have to get our heads around the science Augustine and later his intellectual successor Thomas Aquinas were using. And a lot of it was basically inherited from the ancient Greeks, especially Aristotle. And let me tell you, it was filled with some major oopsies. All right, myth number one. The first huge biological mistake they were running with was this theory called preformationism. And it's all about how they thought conception, making a baby, actually worked. So get this, they believed that the male seed literally contained a tiny, fully formed human. Sometimes they called it a homunculus. Yeah, a little miniature person. The guy provided all the active life stuff, and the woman, she was just the passive soil where this little seed person would grow. Now you can imagine this had massive theological consequences. It meant that spilling seed was seen as something almost like murder because you were basically destroying a potential person. Okay, on to myth number two. This one came straight from Aristotle, and it was about the very nature of gender.
The belief back then was that the whole point of procreation, the natural goal, was to make a male. A female, well, they thought a female was a misbegotten male, basically a male that didn't quite turn out right. Maybe the womb wasn't warm enough or something went wrong in the process. This biological mistake, and it was a huge one, directly led to a theological hierarchy. It literally put women on a lower rung of humanity, seeing them as less rational.
And myth number three, this one was a biggie for Augustine himself. He was just deeply, deeply suspicious of the intense pleasure that comes with sex. He didn't see it as a feature, he saw it as a bug, a glitch in the system that happened because of the fall of man. This intense desire, or concupiscence as he called it, was this chaotic force that just overwhelmed your reason. And that led to a theology where sexual pleasure was always viewed with suspicion. It was a spiritual danger you had to manage, not some gift to be celebrated. So for hundreds of years, these three myths about the seed, about gender, and about pleasure, they pretty much went unchallenged. They were just the accepted facts. But then modern science showed up. And it didn't just tweak the old ideas, it completely rewrote the book. And what's so wild is just how total this correction was. I mean, look at this. On the seed myth, we discovered gametic fusion. Both parents contribute essential chromosomes. It's a team effort. On the gender myth, genetics showed us that females aren't defective males at all. They're determined by XX chromosomes. And pleasure? Neurochemistry shows us that hormones like oxytocin act as a bonding glue, not some chaotic distraction. Science didn't just nudge the old ideas aside, it completely demolished them. Okay, so what happens next? If we take Augustine at his word, if we follow his own razor, when the facts change, the interpretation has to change, what does that mean? Well, it means the theology has to be completely re-examined. And that is exactly what happened. Modern theologians basically took his advice and ran with it. They started this massive recalibration. The whole focus started to shift, moving away from this framework of shame and suppression, controlling a dangerous impulse, and moving toward one of integration and real relational communion. And this wasn't just some abstract academic exercise. No way. The new science had real concrete effects on practice. Suddenly, understanding fertility cycles gave birth to the idea of responsible parenthood. Recognizing that oxytocin bonds people together, that elevated the unitive purpose of intimacy, giving it a reason beyond just making babies. And genetics? Well, it just dismantled that old hierarchy, and that paved the way for a whole new theology of gender equality and complementarity. This chart just lays it all out so perfectly. you can really see the full transformation. The focus shifts from, biological control of a dangerous impulse to relational integration, sex as a language of self-gift. The view of women goes from misbegotten male to a co-equal partner. And pleasure? It's no longer a spiritual distraction, but a biological glue designed to hold that partnership together. It's a night and day difference.
Which brings us to the final, and maybe the most fascinating paradox at the heart of this entire story.
So here's the kicker, the crucial point. By using modern science to correct Augustine, modern thinkers aren't rejecting him. In fact, they're being more Augustinian than he was. They're honoring his deepest intellectual commitment, which was to the truth, and to not letting nonsense about the natural world get in the way of a credible faith. You could say he left the door open for us. He gave us the very principle that lets future generations say, hey, the scientific blueprints have been updated with new knowledge, so now we have to deepen our understanding of the whole structure. All right, so let's land the plane here. What is the big takeaway from this incredible story of intellectual evolution? I think this coach says it all. It captures the essence perfectly. Great saint, you were right about God, but you were talking nonsense about the plumbing. It's about honoring the profound wisdom of a great thinker while still having the courage to fearlessly correct the factual errors that were, let's be honest, based on the very limited science of his day. The big picture here is just so important. It shows that ideas aren't static, they're not frozen in time. They have to evolve as our understanding of the natural world grows. By following Augustine's own advice, modern thought has managed to rebuild a theology of human intimacy on a foundation that actually aligns with real modern human biology. And all of this leaves us with a really compelling question, doesn't it? What other long-held beliefs, maybe in any field, are just waiting for their own scientific upgrade? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.